So I think we'll go ahead and get started then. I don't know if I know all of you, but I am Leslie Warren. I'm the Dean for Library and Instructional Support. I'm going to serve as our moderator today. And, you know, because I generally don't stay quiet, I'll probably interject a few things myself, even though Matt didn't put that in the slide, but, you know, he knows to expect it. And so does Rob and Lisa. Our panelists, Rob Wen, who's the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and also the chair of the Academic Logistics Group. Lisa Flood, who is a nursing faculty, professor in nursing, as well as our teaching and learning scholar. And then Matt Smock, who's the director of our Center for Teaching and Learning. All of us will work to answer your questions. We're going to focus on the modified on-campus classes. So things that would happen in a classroom, but when some of your students, you can't fit all of your students in the classroom simultaneously. We will we'll have Matt and Lisa run through some of the models that could be used in this situation. Because we're at the point where we have no ideal model, what we have are compromises where we have to make our best decisions based on our room, our teaching style, our learning outcomes, the technology that we have available, our students. So we're making compromises as we make choices on how to handle a modified on-campus class. So Matt and Lisa will talk about some of the models and then review some of the positives for that model and some of the challenges with that model to help you think through them. Lisa will also be inviting all of you to share a little bit about what you're thinking or ask any questions about what you're thinking. We'll talk about some of the technology that's available in the rooms, and then we'll do a lot with answering questions too. Rob will review some of the policies that the Academic Logistics Group has recommended for classrooms, like seating chart policies, attendance policies, how you can work with an excused absence versus an accommodation. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions, you're welcome to put in the chat either what the question is, or if you just want to say, I have a question, but I really need to explain it rather than type it, or some abbreviated form of that, you are more than welcome to do that. And we are going to start with, Matt's going to give a couple quick polls so we can learn a little bit about who are the people and what your needs are who are participating. And then we'll turn things over to Matt and Lisa. So take it away, Matt.
So I've just thrown up our first poll, just a few quick questions. I'll leave it up there for just about a minute if you can whip through that, and then I'll show you guys the results and we can kind of see who's here and a little bit about what you're thinking, why you're here.
Matt, how do I respond to the poll? When I click on it, nothing happens.
That's because you are my co-host.
Oh, and I'm
not able to respond to it, but other people are already, the responses are flying in.
Okay, then I'll just sit back and stay quiet. We are being dominated by arts and sciences people today. And we are across the board with teaching experience. And people tend to be modestly or highly confident in their skills with some of the educational technologies. Oh man, lots of concerns. Yeah. I would have many of those concerns too. And then, yep, I see a couple of you are adding additional concerns in the chat. By all means, please do that. And then we can try to work some of those in today with questions, or maybe we'll be able to address some of them with our plan topic, but we will get to those.
Seems like the poll results have stabilized, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results so all of our participants can see. And Leslie, you were sort of providing analysis as it came in. Obviously, Rob told everybody in his college that they should come.
Yep.
Yeah, all 35 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that might be a small percentage of the total.
So, yeah. Anything else you'd like to say about the results, Leslie? I see it kind of spread all over in terms of experience and concerns. And
the additional comments in the chat about concerns, how to educate assignments for multiple labs, how to do educate assignments for multiple labs and multiple discussions. Clearly communicating with students the changes in the courses. Oh, and John raises an important issue of getting COVID myself is a bit of a concern. That is something that we don't really we don't have in our planned comments, but I think it's worth thinking about, and we can make sure we bring it up again today for a discussion, is we talk a lot on campus about what to do if your students are quarantined. We have to be prepared ourselves that we may be quarantined, that we may have to flip. Hopefully we're not sick, but it's certainly possible. So I think those are important things to think about. And then Rebecca Estelle is looking for workshops on VoiceThread and creating groups in that tool. So that we'll leave Matt to comment about that as he talks about some of the technologies that are available and what workshops are still planned and how to get help if there's not a workshop planned. I have no other commentary.
Open up the poll.
Oh, and Ugo asks about late results. Yeah, and you saw the president's email earlier today that talks about some of the delays with the lab. So that is an issue that's being watched.
Okay, so I'm going to lead off and just talk a little bit about technology, not go into a lot of the detail about all of the things that these can be used for at this point, but as we talk about the different models, some of these things will come up. So wanted to introduce them right off the bat. First thing I'm going to do is just in talking about classroom technology as a whole, which is managed by Audiovisual Services. Want to both update people that they put in some new document cameras this summer, as well as some microphones, podium mounted microphones in rooms that didn't have them because of the size of the room. So they have made some upgrades, also upgraded some projectors that were due for it. I've heard some weird rumors that, not that our campus ever has any rumors or anything like that, but that, you know, that there've been cameras put in every room, or that people are going to be available to run cameras in every room. And those things are just not accurate. That has not happened. So I don't want people to go into a room thinking that they're going to have a bunch of new technology there that isn't there, because that was some things that we were hearing over the summer, and I'm not sure where that came from, but just to clear that up. So Zoom video conferencing, I think most everybody got quite familiar with Zoom from March onward, even if they'd never touched it before. We've been doing Zoom workshops leading up for the fall. We've had our last one so far, but we will be scheduling some additional workshops for people who want to get more familiar with Zoom. We've also, on our CTL resources library, added several videos that we made originally for new faculty orientation this year. They go over a lot of the same things that we go over in Zoom. So those are available as reference for people that may want just a refresher, but not to attend a full workshop necessarily. With online technology, of course, you're in the CTL, we've been, supporting EDUCAT for years, and in these various models, people who've traditionally taught face-to-face may want to take advantage of some of the tools that are available in EDUCAT that are traditionally used more by the online, perhaps, such as discussion forums, the assignment Dropbox, which is used in a lot of face-to-face classes anyway, quizzes for your exams. We have added Respondus Monitor, which we piloted a little bit last spring, which is a monitoring tool for proctor and record students while they're taking exams. I know exam security has been an issue that a lot of people have raised. VoiceThread, which Rebecca mentioned in the comments, is a good tool for multimedia discussions. Your students will probably not be getting as much face-to-face time for discussion, at least in most cases. VoiceThread can be a way that they can get something kind of like that. G Suite, I think a lot of us have taken more to using G Suite since we aren't having as many face-to-face meetings where we can throw the Word document up on the projection screen and all work on it in a room. So for things like collaborating on a Google Doc, there's ways you may be able to leverage that with students who can't sit side by side anymore. There's a new tool called Jamboard. It's a Google tool. It's a collaborative whiteboard that has been added to our G Suite. And for some instances where maybe traditionally you would have had students writing or working together on a real whiteboard, that might work. I also wanted to mention we have our Studio 102 recording facility available, taking appointments there for people who want to pre-record themselves, either with our whiteboard or against a green screen to have videos available, maybe to fill some of the blanks. And of course, then that works with video streaming services that we can help you with, like using Wildcast or YouTube. So any questions about any of that stuff before I move on?
We have a couple questions in the chat that relate to this. John Reavers asks how to help students who are uncomfortable with online learning. So I know we have the mandatory self-paced tutorial that students have to do before they take an online class, a class that's designated as an online class. Is that tutorial available for other students too, even if they're not in a class that's designated as an online class?
Yes, any student can take that tutorial. They aren't required to, obviously, if it's not designated as an online class, but they are allowed to take it, and they might get some value out of some of the resources and introductions to the tools that are in there.
Does it automatically show up for them on their dashboard though? I thought I had heard it only is the enrolled people are only the ones that are required to take it.
I can double check that, but I think all students are loaded automatically into it. Faculty aren't, because they don't like to have too many courses on their list.
I was automatically enrolled in it.
Maybe we knew you liked online.
Rebecca asks about some of the tracking and tracing, and let's see, we can, I guess we don't really have a section here for tracking and tracing, although attendance policies, it kind of fits. So who tells us to stay home if a student cancels due to COVID? That would come from the Marquette County Health Department when they do tracking and tracing based on your interactions with students. Rob, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you covered that. The key is if a student in one of your face-to-face classes has a positive test for COVID, then we talk about seating charts later on. We'll talk about the fact that they're going to use that seating chart to determine who was close to that student for more than 15 minutes. Just because you have a student who tests positive in your class does not mean that the instructor, may not mean that the instructor has to go into isolation or be quarantined. So your class could still stay face-to-face with the students who can't come to class being offered some kind of alternative opportunity. And we can bring those up again when I talk about seating charts and attendance and remote learning.
We have a question about live streaming our lectures for students who want to be online. And that would also apply to students where you just, well, if you want to live stream for students who want to be online, or if you need to as part of an accommodation, we're going to talk about some of the ways to manage having them stream synchronously into the class. Zoom can do it. There are some limitations on the instructor though. They need to be close to their laptop because generally they're going to be relying on their laptop's camera and microphone. And they would have to think about how they're engaging the student who's participating remotely. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Students, as far as, I think when we get to the attendance too, we talk a little bit more about there will be students who have an accommodation because of a medical issue that requires them to participate remotely. Those students you would need to provide a live stream for and keep them engaged even though they're participating remotely. Students who are absent because they are sick or because they're quarantined would be an excused absence. You treat them more like you might have treated an athlete who needs to make up the work, but you don't necessarily need to Zoom them into the class. Question about assignment Dropbox. Can you make one assignment have different due dates for multiple lab sections? It's a Matt question.
There are a couple ways you could address that. You could do an override to allow certain students different dates than the rest, or you could have two versions of the assignment assigned to different people. I would recommend talking with your CTL liaison to see which one of those ways would work best for you.
Jill Leonard wants to know if there's a way that we could tell if our students took the online training course because she might give them extra credit. You wouldn't be able to see it on your own. You're probably working with your CTL liaison to figure that out. Is that right, Matt? That's a Matt question. He got distracted, I could see. We're answering Jill's question about how an instructor would know if the student had completed the online course tutorial.
Right. No, normally you can tell because if you're teaching an online course, they can get into your course. In this case, we have a completion report we can run. So if you want to know about specific students, I would say talk to your liaison, yes.
Do you have instructional videos for any of the tools that you mentioned on the technology page, such as VoiceThread or Jamboard?
Jamboard, not yet, though there's not a whole lot to it. And we'll probably put some things together. I think Google has some things out there. Zoom, we have a ton of instructional videos for. VoiceThread, we've got documentation. We don't really have videos for that, but I believe VoiceThread has some available. We have, I guess the short answer is we have resources available for most of it. Some are videos, some are more reference documents or step-by-step instructions.
And that's nmu.edu/CTL.
Yes.
I'd also like to add there's VoiceThread instructions for students that you can upload into EduCat. So if you're having them do presentations via VoiceThread or you want them to make introductions to each other online, it's a great tool, and there's all kinds of instructions available for you to use with your students.
And a question, how do we find out who our CTL liaison is? Again, you can either just call the CTL and ask, or you can go to nmu.edu/CTL and look that up. We have a specific question about Zoom. Can you predetermine group members in Zoom breakout groups, or is it just random?
You can do it either way. You can manually assign them when you start breakout rooms by putting each student individually in, or you can just pick random. You can't decide ahead of class, unfortunately. Like for the polls, you saw I threw that poll up real quickly. I had built that poll ahead of time. But with the way Zoom works, with students not having to log in using a username, they just click your link. The Zoom meeting doesn't know who the students are until they're actually in there. So you can manually put them in, but you have to do it during the class time. You can't do it ahead of time.
And Crystal wants to know how you did the magic of the poll at the beginning of this. She didn't use the word magic, but you get the idea.
Well, in the when you're hosting a meeting, you have a polls option, and you can click that. You can build it right then on the fly. If you want to build it ahead of time, you go to nmu.zoom.us and access your meeting through there rather than through Educat, and there is an add poll function.
And it looks like the rest of the comments are the participants helping each other. So I think it's safe for us to move on.
Okay. So we're going to just take a quick step back. Leslie, you already covered this pretty much in the introduction, but we've had some people drop in since then. So before we started talking about the different options for modified on campus, we just wanted to quickly give an overview of what we're talking about when we say modified on campus. I think most people are probably aware of this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, due to the social distancing requirements that we're all dealing with this semester and have been dealing with for a while, many of our face-to-face courses won't be able to have all students physically attend all the class meetings. So those courses will keep a face-to-face component, but their delivery will need to be modified in some way, and there are various options for doing that. And that's the term we're using here at Northern, is modified on campus. And I finally learned the term myself, so I don't even have to look it up every time. So were there any questions about that, or should we dive in and start talking a little bit more about some of those options?
I don't see any questions. Oh, wait, we have a question. With the modified on-campus model, how many classes in person versus virtual sessions should we have? Can we switch to more virtual sessions if cases go up? So that's actually seems to be asking a different question. So we have one of the course formats that we've had even before social distancing and the pandemic was hybrid. And a hybrid class has face-to-face elements and it has online elements. And that one, all of your students are doing the same thing. So all of your students have face-to-face time, all of your students have online time, and they kind of move as a group. In this case, when we talk about modified on campus, it's a little different because typically what we're expecting is that every week the students have some face-to-face experience and some not face-to-face experience where they're learning either synchronously or asynchronously online, but they're receiving instruction. They're not just doing homework, but they are having every student generally, for the most part, because nothing is quite completely black and white these days, has a face-to-face component each week, rather than, we're talking about all of the students can't fit in the room together. So we're not really talking about modifying it a way where all of your students can fit in your room, so they attend on the first week, the 5th week, the 7th week, and the 12th week. So Veronica, if does that answer? It doesn't specifically answer your question, but do you want us to explain more on that? You're welcome to turn on your mic if you want to talk about that one a little bit.
Thank you. I was just wondering if there is a specific, percentage of classes that that they have to meet in person, and then if cases go up, could we possibly switch? So I'm thinking if I have 25 students and 5 of them get infected, then can I just say, okay, for the next weeks we will meet virtually?
I'm going to kick that over to Rob.
So I think you raise a very good point, and that certainly is, depending on the number of students you have, if a student in your class tests positive and then a significant percentage of your class has to quarantine and cannot longer come face to face, then it probably is in your best interest to say exactly what you said. For the next 14 days or the next 3 weeks, we're going to have to be online. That certainly will be the case if the instructor has to quarantine, and the instructor is going to have to say for the next X amount of time, we're going to have to be online because you won't be allowed to be on campus. And we've tried to be very flexible. If your class is not listed as an online only class, we expect you to have a face-to-face component. How much of that face-to-face component we have left pretty nebulous because we want faculty to be creative in how they do things. And I think that Matt is now going to talk about some various ways that some various options for meeting with your class when it's face-to-face part of the time and part of the class is not directly there in front of you, and how you might be able to reach them.
So Crystal asks about the relationship to the section number. The section numbers that are used this year are still the section numbers that we used pre-pandemic. So they identify if it's a face-to-face class, if it's a web synchronous, a web asynchronous, or a hybrid A or hybrid B, which is based on different percentages of on-campus versus online. We don't have a section number that identifies modified on campus. I think those are generally being coded as face-to-face right now.
That is correct.
So Matt, I think we're clear to move forward.
Okay, so we have a few options we're going to talk about. They're not necessarily the only options, but when we sat down and talked about possibilities that we knew of faculty planning or that we'd heard of other places, these were the ones that seemed to have the common themes, if you will. So the first one I'm going to start with is the one that we're hearing about the most, where your video conferencing class meetings, also, referred to as zooming in half the class or zooming in part of the class. This would be where you have a group of students, or you might, depending on the size of your class, have them broken into more than 2 groups. But for the purposes of my example, I've got group A and group B. On one day of class, I have group A in the classroom face-to-face with me physically, while the other group, group B, is attending via Zoom. And then when the next class meeting happens, the groups switch places. The most important part of this, though, is that the groups are assigned. So you assign the groups. You might ask students to volunteer, but they don't just get to pick which they go to on which day. Those are predetermined groups because you have to know who's going to be in class or who's supposed to be in class on each day, and those numbers are very specific. So we're not really talking about what you may be hearing a bit about in the news. It's called the HyFlex model. The real HyFlex model, that flex came from the students having the ability on any given day to decide whether they were going to go face-to-face or whether they were going to be at home. And so we don't have that level of flexibility here in the pandemic. There's a similarity that in the HyFlex model, there's a video conferencing component, but we specifically can't just have students deciding on a given day, oh, I slept in a little bit, so I'm going to be in online, or, oh, I was supposed to be online today, but I really missed Dr. Flood, so I'm going to go to class today. We can't have that. So Lisa's going to talk a little bit about the strengths and challenges of this. So I actually see a lot of challenges, and I made the challenges bullets, but I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Okay. So from the faculty side, I think that we can all agree that this is a similar format to what many of us use. And so one of the positives or strength would be that there's, for most of us, little difference in class prep from what we previously used to this model. And all of your students are on the same schedule. So those that are attending remotely on a day that they're not allowed to be in the classroom, they're on the same schedule as the students that are in the classroom with you. However, as Matt alluded, there are some challenges that the CTL and I can see for this model. One of them is going to be, which is what I'm experiencing right now, trying to simultaneously manage all of my remote learners with the PowerPoint, his PowerPoint on. I can only see 5 images, and I think we have 41 people attending today. So imagine if I also had 20 students in front of me physically in the classroom and 40 some attendees via Zoom. Trying to manage both the people in front of me and the people on Zoom simultaneously is going to be a challenge for faculty. I won't have a moderator like Leslie unless I assign a student to do that, to manage the chat. So it's going to be a little challenging for me to see if my remote students have questions. If my remote students ask a question via chat, I will have to verbally say that out loud so the students that are present can hear it, and then vice versa if someone in the classroom asks a question. So that's, I think, going to be a challenge. As a faculty member, you're going to be relying on your laptop webcam. So it's going to be challenging for those of you that perhaps like the whiteboard or the chalkboard to work out problems or diagram on. Also, you're going to need to be tethered fairly close to your computer because of the microphone that's in your computer. So it picks your voice up for your remote attendees. We did have Eric Smith pilot test some of the abilities of the microphones in the laptops, and he did go to several different rooms, and they did test the audio wearing both face shields and masks.
And it was only a 2-credit course. Have you ever taught that one?
And
Yeah, don't. I wouldn't recommend it.
That sounds like
so that was crazy.
Mike's voice.
okay, thank you. Kristen, I think your mic was on. Okay, sorry about that. And so we do think that the microphones are pretty good in the laptops, although he did admit the sound is somewhat muffled. As Matt talked a little bit about, they did order some more microphones that will attach to the desktops in some of the bigger rooms. So there are additional microphones that you can use, especially in the larger classrooms. So the other thing that I think is going to be a problem, the students as a group, unless they're meeting in smaller subgroups for discussion or labs, they're never going to be together as a class. So creating that sense of community for the different sections of your class, whether it's half are meeting with you at a time, or maybe in some of the bigger classrooms, only a third are meeting with you at a time. So creating that sense of community is going to be challenging. And there may be some other challenges that some of you are. So for this model, there are some technical challenges and challenges as the instructor to manage the 2 groups.
Lisa, another challenge for this model is simply the first step of assigning the students. Is there an automated way to do that? Or if you have 100 students in the class, do you have to go through and individually assign each of those 100 students? And
No,
the question
well,
is, the rosters.
Well, one of the things that I would do is probably roster and just making a decision based on my roster number. And I'm going to go like A through K comes on Monday, and then L through Z comes on Friday.
But after the roster changes the next day, you might exceed the room capacity.
Are you that tight with your numbers?
Many of our classes are, yes.
Yeah. I don't really have a good answer for that, except that you'll have to just, I guess, for the first week, try to figure out an estimated number. Probably, I'm also thinking for those larger numbers, not everybody will show up anyhow. If you have 50 coming at a time, there may not be all 50 that show up. So probably banking on a few not coming.
I would be careful about doing that, because remember, you have to have seating charts too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think because you've got seating charts, we're going to get to some of the questions in the chat, but keep in mind that you have to know who was in your class each day. So you may have to adjust the seating chart, adjust the breakdown a week or so into the class, and resubmit your seating chart once the drop in ads work their way through.
I was thinking the same thing, that for those people that have a lot of drop-in ads, they may have to do a seating chart the first week and then repeat that seating chart. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the student to talk to the person next to them, find out their name, that's their contact person, and then I'm going to ask them to help me with who's absent on any given day, just to speed that process up. I'm not sure if I answered your question, John. I don't know if there is a great answer for that.
So we've got a couple questions from the chat. Rob, some of these are going to need some information from you, I think. Well, we've got a pair of questions that actually ask the flip side of the same coin. So we have somebody who asks, what if a student wants to do all of their course sessions online due to COVID concerns? We have another question that asks, what if a student wants to attend all class sessions in person? So Rob, you want to take those?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So if you have a student who wants to take all of their coursework online, the only way that they can be guaranteed to do that is if they get a medical accommodation through disability services. So they will need to have a documented medical reason and a note from a healthcare provider in order to get that accommodation. Now, Harger Bowl will speak with them, and if they get that accommodation, there are some classes that they will not be able to take remotely, and so that may mean that they need to adjust their schedule so that their all their courses can be online. Now, if a student reaches out to you and says, I would like to have all of my all of this class online, and you are offering a remote offering and you don't have a problem with not having them in the classroom, that is up to you as the instructor. You can say, that's fine, you can Zoom in every day and not attend face-to-face, but that is solely at the discretion of the instructor. The flip side is also the same. If you have a student who wants to be in class all the time and you have room for them, and that is fine with you as the instructor, you can put them in. If you not have room for them, then we cannot accommodate that request, and they will have to take part of their classes, part of that class remotely. So that one is solely a case of if you have room, and that's something that you are willing to do for that student. I know that there are some faculty members who have put it out there to their class and said, I'm giving you the option of doing this class completely remotely. Enough students said, I would like to do that all the rest of the class can be in the room all of the time. It's just that once that happens, if you've taken up all the seats, you've taken up all the seats, and you can't change that then unless you ask some of the students who are meeting face-to-face to go back to online learning.
So the following question is along the same lines, but administratively, it's much, 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 much more challenging for the instructor. So we have the question where the class is only a few students over capacity. So the faculty member is going to assign 3 students at a time that will stay home for classes 1 week, and then they will rotate. So the whole semester, most of the students would be there. For each student, they would be assigned class at home 2 weeks per semester. I would say that the instructor who does that is going to have a nightmare for submitting seating charts, because we need to have seating charts for every class. And if your students are rotating, you would need a seating chart for every one of those classes, and you would need to submit it soon after every one of those classes. Rob, do you see anything else with that model?
Well, I think the key here, I mean, as a whole, that model may not be bad. I might reach out to my class, particularly if there are only 3 students over, and see if there are 3 students that might volunteer to learn remotely for a longer period of time. If you're going to follow this model, as Leslie said, and I know that I read through the chats, there's some questions about seating charts, including what are seating charts. You would have to submit a new seating chart every week, which you know is not something that's too onerous if you're only have to reassign 3 students or whatever. But we do need current seating charts throughout the semester, and I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes.
I guess I would just add on really quickly that one caution I would have with students volunteering to be remote all semester. I mean, if they're truly out of town, they're probably not going to change their minds. But I think that some students are going to find that the remote experience when there are face-to-face students also is not the same remote experience that they had last spring when everybody was remote. Some instructors are going to be great at this. Some are going to struggle a little more, especially early. So students may find that they aren't getting the experiences that they thought they were going to get when they volunteered to be remote and want to change their minds.
So it may be worthwhile to just from the start say, here's for the first 6 weeks, here's our seating chart, here's our plan. In 6 weeks, we'll redo it towards set some points where the expectation is that it may get restructured. We had a question not related to the current topic. How do you do a stop the clock disability accommodation and EDUCAT quiz or test? I'm going to save that one until the end. If we don't get to it, then contact your CTL liaison. This one, I don't know, Matt, is it possible to caption Zoom for deaf students who are remote?
Yes, it is not automatic. There is a captioning function in Zoom that requires a human captioner. I would say if you have a student that needs that function, that they should work with disability services and see what can be done there. We haven't had one of those yet. From the technical end, we could fairly easily set up somebody to be a captioner. We don't have anybody on staff that does that. But there is a captioning function in Zoom.
What does that mean? A human, like somebody else in the class is typing while the...
I wouldn't recommend it be another student. No, I mean, disability services would have to find somebody to be the captioner if there were that accommodation needed. It's a skill. It takes a really good typist and somebody who's capable of, identifying who's speaking and things like that. So, yeah, I wouldn't have another student do it.
What about that software that does it in real time when you're presenting? Is that through, I can't remember what it is, but.
You might be talking about Dragon Naturally Speaking. Google Slides also does some captioning. It does not do it to ADA standards though, which was what you would need if there were someone who had an accommodation for captioning. They would need more than the mechanized captioning that some of the services can provide.
I do want to add, Harger has purchased some clear masks. So if you do have a student that is a hearing deficit or a hearing disability, and they need to see your face for lip reading, that you can ask him to, and he's happy to share some of those masks with you.
There is a discussion that seems to be taking care of itself in the chat about having every student, even if they're in the room, be connected through Zoom so that all students can interact together, whether they're in the room or working remotely. We think that's possible with bandwidth. We would encourage students and instructors to use have students with earbuds and probably microphones in order to do that, so there's not a lot of feedback or ambient noise. Let's see, we talked about captioning. More about seating charts. We'll get to seating charts in a minute. And then Eric Autumn has to go to the auto glass shop appointment because of a rock through his windshield. But Eric, I hope you can get that taken care of taken care of. And I think we can move on to our next model.
The next model is flipping. So we've been talking about flipping as part of active learning. I think I said 8 years the other day, then I went back and counted, and it's been more like 10 or 12 since we had our first big active learning initiative that I was part of. I know there was active learning before that. But in this flipping model, which you may have heard of before, instructor pre-records lectures and or assigns other primary content. So maybe some publisher materials or something, you know, something on YouTube or even just a textbook reading. Has a lot of that primary stuff that's done outside of class time. And then in a normal flipping situation, pre-pandemic, the whole class would gather for discussions and in-class activities following doing that. In this pandemic flipping model, the groups do the same in-class activities, but on different days. So for example, group A comes in for a discussion on Monday, group B has that same discussion on Tuesday. And again, some strengths and challenges. Lisa.
Okay, so some of the strengths, obviously, for this model is that you save your precious class time for active learning, engaging the students in the content that they should have already reviewed prior to coming to class. So you can really spend your class time doing case studies or working through problems or putting the students into small groups, using the breakout rooms in Zoom, to have them work on problems. You could have them do some mini presentations. There's lots of things. It's pretty much unlimited what you want to do during your class time. The challenges for faculty is that for some of us, we're going to have to do some additional content preparation. So it also takes time, as I learned over the weekend, it takes quite a bit of time if you're going to record lectures. Depending on which method you want to use. We've got Camtasia, you have VoiceThread, perhaps YouTube videos. There's technology available to capture your lectures. But then you have to think about, so if you're going to do that ahead of time, what are you going to do with your class time? You might have to find additional assignments, find practice questions, exams, develop some case studies. I think the other challenges are going to be that there could be some different due dates for the different groups. So if you're going to require any kind of an assignment as a ticket to attend class or to come to class that day, there'll be some different due dates. We are somewhat frowning on having things that people have to do in class. Because, for example, if you had a quiz, in the typical flipped classroom, you might have a quiz in the beginning of class to encourage the students to perhaps watch your recorded lectures. But we really don't want people having to come to class to take a quiz if they're ill. So we have to really be mindful of that this semester. So what would perhaps be some low stake things that you could do, or something online that you could have them take, where maybe they wouldn't exactly have to come to class on that particular day. But flipping does help. Some of the problems that we talked about with the previous model is that you're not trying to lecture to two different groups simultaneously, and you can create lectures without being distracted with managing all the technology in the nice, quiet environment of your office or your home. So those are some of the challenges. You may think of others that I have not covered. Any questions?
We do have a couple questions in the chat. Some of them are actually still related to the previous model. One of the questions that I missed earlier, where did it go? There's a question from Deborah. Is 18 the max number of students showing on Zoom? Does that depend on the size of your monitor?
I don't know what a max is, actually. I mean, I think it's more than 18. Depends which view you go with. Yeah, I have more than 18 up now. If you click the little in the window that has the video, there's like icons that show a single line, then a slightly bigger box, and 2 boxes, and then more of like a tic-tac-toe look. If you click the tic-tac-toe one, and you can drag that window to a fairly big size, and it's going to be more than 18. It is going to be limited though. It's not going to show everybody in a big class.
One of the questions we had is following up on a comment that I made. When there was the question of every student, even the ones who are in the room participating on Zoom, I mentioned bandwidth. So this question came up last week, and which is how I remember Matt saying last week that we expect there to be enough bandwidth capacity for everybody in the same room to be on Zoom together. Yes, right? You said that last week.
Yeah.
But the question was the bandwidth comment a potential warning to possible challenges with lots of students in one room on Zoom for small group discussions to include the other half of the class? Yes, it was a warning, although we think that it's probably not an issue unless your entire building is doing the same thing, in which case you're probably might see some bandwidth issues. Am I still right on track, Matt? Or I should just kick this question over to you.
Well, you've answered most of it. I would say that's accurate. We obviously haven't tried this. We've never had a bunch of people in class trying to Zoom to a bunch of people out of class at the same time. And the more people that are doing it in one spot, the higher the load's going to be on the network. I don't expect technical issues, at least not widespread ones, from doing that. I think managing it provides some challenges when you've got students who are still, despite social distancing, within a fairly small group of each other, and they're all talking. Definitely you want them using some kind of headset microphone, but even then voices might be picked up that aren't for the person in the sub conversation and stuff. So that's the type of thing I would be more concerned about, actually.
Although they can also type. So if you have somebody who is a group that wants to use the chat or something other than voice, they can manage that. There is still some discussion too about how many people fit on Zoom. Rick Minjan says with our laptops, the video card restricts it to 25 videos on a screen at a time. I did not know that. And then there are some other people who are experimenting with how many they can get based on what type of monitor they have and whether they're using the laptop. I think I've caught up on the questions. If I've missed something, just copy and paste it and get my attention again. But otherwise, I think it's safe to move on.
Okay, well, our third
John has a hand.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to follow up on that question. Would having students turn their video off and go to name, like some of the people here in Zoom, would that help with the bandwidth if it starts getting laggy or choppy or something?
Yes, it should. The video is the biggest part of the bandwidth.
And then they should, I guess, be able to do miking on and off, muting, to help with the problem of in-class neighbors talking at the same time when they're group discussions with students at home.
That definitely helps. It's getting people to actually do it that can be the challenge. But yeah, good question, John.
There was a question too about remote students coming in through EAN or through actually any other internet provider. Could they face challenges? I think the answer clearly is yes. Whether any internet provider sometimes has glitches and slow periods, and I think all of us since March have been on Zoom meetings with people who have some slowdown in their transmission or who get cut. And somebody wants to know if using groups in VoiceThread would be more workable.
I'd say it's a different activity. One's synchronous, live, and one is asynchronous. So it's probably easier to manage once it's set up to do it in VoiceThread. But if you want that live interaction, then VoiceThread's not your solution.
All right, I think we're caught up. There are a couple more comments and sharing, but no more questions that I've seen in the chat.
Okay, then we'll talk a little bit about our third model. We're calling it partial flipping. Lisa and I talked about what to call this. We both heard of people who are doing it or talking about doing it, and it didn't really have a name, but this is sort of a combination of traditional lecture with flipping, where the instructor still pre-records some lectures, but not all of them. So you reserve that content that you think you give the biggest value add for, maybe the hardest stuff, maybe the stuff that's your really in your strongest area of expertise, or you provide that regional slant that they don't get from the textbook. Pre-record lectures, give textbook or other source readings for some of it, but then still lecture that key stuff in class, delivering those lectures multiple times a week to these separate groups. Lisa?
So some of the strengths for this is that you can focus on the students that you have in class. There's going to be less challenges trying to lecture and managing the different video conferencing technology. And then you can make sure that the more difficult concepts, problems, common issues and themes that you've seen over the years teaching classes, you can address those in class with your valuable class time. Again, some of the same challenges that we've talked about before with the full flipping model, there's additional content prep, and then you might be managing some differing due dates with the various groups depending on how many different groups you're splitting your class into, whether you have 2 or 3 or maybe more. So those are some of the challenges with this. And again, these 3 models are what we brainstormed within the CTL. You may have something else that you're thinking of doing. In my mind, we are all building a new bridge, if you will, into uncharted waters this semester because we have not taught in this manner before. So I don't think there is one size that fits all. And I guess I would encourage you to also check with your students to see what they think is working for them, and then be willing to be flexible and maybe switch up one of these models or try one or more until you find what seems to work for your particular group and your discipline. Questions?
I don't see any new questions in the chat. Rebecca suggests formative surveys in classes as we go. That I think will be useful. One of the things that we're also planning, and we'll ask you about it in another poll at the end of the session, is when we should do more of these forums. So we had the suggestion last week that after a short period of time in the semester, into the semester, we have another forum for faculty so that you can come back, reflect on what you've learned so far, and see if you can share experiences and continue to adjust. Let's see. John Reavers sees 2 challenges with students on Zoom, not unique to online classes: the lurkers who never talk, and the Hermiones who talk all the time and dominate the class. That's interesting. I've never heard them called that. And let's see, Jill asked, did we get an answer about whether EDUCAT can have different deadlines for the same assignment?
Yes, we did.
Are you going to tell her or make her wait?
For the recording, you mean? Yeah, you can add overrides. So you can only set one due date in the assignment properties, but then you can add overrides for specific students or groups of students to have different dates. The alternative would be to set up 2 different assignments, one for each group, and have different dates on the assignments. That gets a little bit trickier with the grade book though.
All right, then I think it's safe for us to move on. And, oh, attendance. This is fun stuff.
All right, I think that's me. And Matt made me a slide. Last time I had to share my screen. Thanks, Matt. Hey, so I'm going to start with, this is an example of one of the seating charts that we will have for the purposes of tracking and tracing in the event that a student in your class tests positive for COVID-19. The county health department is going to need to know who was seated close to that student. And so by the end of the day tomorrow or early Wednesday, facilities will have completed a chart similar to the one that's on your screen for every general classroom and every department used classroom on campus, with the exception of a few labs. We will send you a link where you can download the PDF of your specific rooms, and then you can either pre-fill these and tell the students where you want them to sit, or you can let the students self-select and then fill them out the first day of class. I realize if you have a very large class that that may take a little bit of time. Then if it was me, I would make sure the students are well aware that with few exceptions, that is where they're sitting the rest of the semester. We then have developed a form that we will have everyone go in. They will then, each faculty member will go in, will fill out that little form. They will attach their seating chart to that form. It's very simple. I thank Leslie Warren for her work on that. And then that will be available to public safety, so that if the county health department needs the seating chart at any time of the day or night, we're not calling you at 2 in the morning asking you for a copy of your seating chart. In addition to the seating charts, which you're all going to have to fill out and submit, we are asking that you take attendance at every face-to-face class. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to call roll. That just means that you can do any variety of things. Some faculty members have said that they are just going to take a photo with their cell phone of their class, and then if there's a question later on of who was there on a particular day, they'll just pull up that photo. You might do a non-credit or a 4-credit quiz. If your class is small, you might call roll. If you're using clickers, you might just have students use their clickers. The idea is that if we need to know who was in the room on a certain day, that you will have some attendance, numbers or names for those days. As for absence types, we have had an excuse policy at the university that applied to athletes and students who were gone on university business, that they would be excused and would be allowed to make up work. We have added to that, if a student misses class due to COVID or COVID-like symptoms, because we're going to stress again, we do not want students to come to class when they're sick. They need to be allowed to make up any work that they miss. Now, if they are absent due to illness, you do not have to offer them a synchronous online experience. Now, if you're Zooming your class and you want to, that's fine. That's not a requirement. They do need to be allowed to make up the work so that it's not, so that we aren't inducing students to come to class when they're sick. If a student has a medical accommodation, then we do need to figure out a way to give them a synchronous or a near synchronous experience, but Harger should be reaching out to talk about those. With that, I know there's a lot of comments that have jumped up in the chat, and I'll let Leslie start to go through those.
Sure. I'll also point out everything that Rob is saying about we don't want students to come to class sick also applies to all of us. I know many of us would teach if we woke up in the morning with a sore throat, if we thought, you know, I feel okay, I'll just take this cold medicine and get rid of the symptoms, and so I won't have the runny nose and I'll just go teach because it needs to get done, I'm doing a test, whatever, I need to move on. Don't do that this semester. This is going to be hard for all of us. All of us have work ethics that really want to get through our classes. We want to come on campus, get things done, and we just can't do that this semester. So we've got to remember that all that we're talking about with our students also applies to us. And so you may need to either cancel your class or tell your class that class will be conducted online today, or come up with some backup method in case you're either feeling symptoms or you're in quarantine, because we're no different than the students in that case. Let's see, Amy is feeling good because she has a class in this room that's shown. Well, that's good. So we know your seating chart is ready. Hugo has a couple questions about his particular classroom. We'll get to those near the end if we can, Hugo, since it's a little more personalized. Crystal and John are talking about a couple other methods to do seating charts. They're talking about assigning numbers and having students fill out a survey to say where they are. Could help with larger classes. Absolutely, give things like that a try. Some of your rooms will have pre-numbered seats if you're in a room that sells tickets, for example. So Reynolds Recital Hall, Forrest Roberts, or Jamrich 1100, their seats are already numbered. That might also be true in Mead Auditorium. So some of those rooms will already have numbered seats. That makes it a little bit easier. But most of the rooms though will not have pre-numbered seats. If you want to number them in advance, you're welcome to. The one thing that we want to remind everybody of as far as doing the seating chart is don't just pass around the form and ask people to put their names on it, because we're trying not to pass things around in the room. Let's see, Educat has an attendance tool. Matt, do you want to speak any about the Educat attendance tool and how it works?
Sure. Educat attendance tool it's basically like a roll call type attendance tool, but where the instructor can just check off. It lists everybody on the course roster, and you can set it up so you check it off for particular days who's there. That's pretty much it. It's a pretty simple tool.
Do you just set it up as one activity in one spot and you can go in there each day? Or do you have to have a new attendance activity per day?
You can do it as one activity, and then you can say how many class meetings you want there to be for that, or if you want there to be specific things that are on that. I think it could work well for a relatively small class. If you got into a 90-person class that was in Jamrich 1100, you'd have to be taking roll, and it would take a lot of your time. But for a small class, it could work well.
Let's see. Is there an easy checklist for faculty with all these new items that we need to do? Michael Joy points out one page through the Safe on Campus things, but Rob, one of the questions that I've heard is how are faculty getting this information about what are the recommendations coming out of academic logistics? Where are you seeing the communication channels?
So Michael points out actually where I would have told you to go. So this is where he pointed out, and thank you very much for doing that. These are the pandemic related processes and protocols. So if you look at The third one down, it's class attendance, and it lists the class attendance policy that tells who's excused from being in class on what day. Class-related transportation is there. As of probably about Wednesday, seating chart responsibilities will be there. Cleaning protocols are there. Office hour requirements are there. Mask and mask exceptions are there. Medical exceptions. This is a great resource, and thank you for pointing that out, so that you can see all of the recommendations that have been approved by the Executive Council and the Board of Trustees.
Hugo, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question that was in before. You have some comments and questions. You want to just turn on your mic and say what you've got?
It's not like you're going to be this quiet.
Oh, is Hugo still here? Oh, I don't think, where is he? I don't see him listed. All right, Hugo, if you come back, let us know.
Oh,
He's waving.
Oh, is he?
Hugo.
I can't
It
hear
looks like his mic's on, but we can't hear him.
Is your mic turned off on your computer? So have you muted yourself there?
He says keep going.
Okay. Sorry about that, Hugo. Crystal asked, do you have to make one for each session? I assume that seating chart. The answer is you have to make one for every seating arrangement. So if you use the same seating arrangement every Tuesday and a different one every Thursday, you'd need to submit 2. If you're doing the very complex 3 students change each day, and then you'd need a seating chart for every session. You do need to keep attendance, but you don't need to submit that every day. Just be available if it's asked for. Are we taking attendance every day or just submitting any changes in the seating chart, and the contact tracers will assume everyone was present? Rob, do you want to talk a little bit more about how the contact tracers are using the attendance sheets?
If I have to put a priority, the seating charts are probably of higher priority than the attendance. The way the contract tracers will work is they will get the seating chart. They will then know who was seated closest to that student. The advantage of the attendance is that they can see then on which particular days people were actually in place. If they don't have the attendance chart, then they will need to reach out to everyone if they were there or not. And so you don't have to submit your attendance to anyone unless you're asked for it. The seating chart, because it's more important, that we're asking you to submit so that we have it on hand. And then if you need to update that seating chart for whatever reason, we will ask you to resubmit it. It shouldn't be too onerous to do that.
Crystal says, I'm worried I'm going to miss something because it is information overload. Crystal, it's like you're reading my mind. I've been feeling that way myself lately. Some days I feel like I've got more answers than questions, but that's usually fairly brief. And then it goes back to more questions.
By lately, we mean since March.
Well, it's nice of you to not say that it's been since I started here 7 years ago. That's very kind of you. Let's see. Here's a magic question. Is there a specific percentage of students, faculty, staff with COVID-19 that will make NMU switch to online instruction only? Rob, you want to take that one, or do you want me to? Actually, Rob, how about you take that one?
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
So while there are numbers that will cause a review of particular things, there are not hard and fast numbers, at which point we would switch to remote learning or to all online. The reason for that is it sort of depends on the circumstances. I know President Erickson likes to throw toss under the bus, where he often says, so if we had 25 students who all got sick, but they were all in construction management, we may have to shut down part of the university, but the rest of the students could still go. Now, if we had 25 students, there were 50 students who were spread throughout campus, then the situation would be different. Then there are other things to take into account. If we have students who are sick and we have to quarantine, we will be putting them in Spalding, where we have some quarantine beds there. When that gets filled, we do have some overflow, but at what point do we start to review? And so there are numbers. They are in a document that I know that they're trying to shorten right now, that will be published, so you can see what kind of numbers would cause certain reviews. And then based on those reviews would determine if we had to change our mode of teaching or if we were to close campus. All of those are dependent on the governor and what the governor says. So if the governor says we're going back to phase 4, doesn't really matter what our numbers are, we have to do what the governor says. So the document that Colonel Adams, our consultant, put together was several, I'll just put very, very long. And they're trying to put that into a dashboard that we can go, that will be in real time, and that people can go and look at and get an idea of, you know, what kinds of things that they're paying attention to and what kind of numbers we're currently seeing. Anything to add, Leslie?
Oh, no, you gave a much more thorough answer than I could have. Fine job. Here's a good question too. Somebody who's actually using this room in McClintock 106, but the maximum is 42 in the classroom capacity PDF document that was sent to us. Is 40 the new maximum? How can I get the confirmed maximum? Rob, some of the room capacities have been shifting a little bit. Do you want to talk about that?
Some of the room capacities have changed a little bit as they have gone back. And so in this case, I'm assuming that the official capacity is 40. I don't know for sure, but I will check with facilities. And when we post all the seating charts, they will have the accurate and capacity, and we'll make sure that you know what that is as soon as possible.
A question whether NMU has a standard term for a class not being taught face-to-face. There are actually a couple. We use online classes when we have full definitions for those that the registrar has used before the pandemic. Online classes include sessions that are where the instructors are not in the same room with the students. Last spring, we used distance classes when we were talking about that pivot, so that classes that were face-to-face were being conducted through some other method, because those classes didn't really fit any of our traditional models. They weren't an online class in the traditional model. They were just we're in a pandemic, we're in a crisis mode, we're going to get things done. We don't want students to think this is what an online class typically is. So in that case, it was called distance teaching or something that was a little different, but online is the word that we use, or hybrid if it has face-to-face and online elements. Let's see, are these seating charts available to upload in a Google Doc to share with class? Then they can check present for each session. And Hugo's asked, can check the volume button on his laptop. But the seating charts, there was some talk last week about how we can use Google Documents, shared documents. I think last week there was some speculation that PowerPoint might work best, or so whatever the Google Slides are, because it would allow people to annotate on the slide from where they're sitting in kind of a synchronous format. What I would say is, Rebecca, try some of these models and let us know what works. Yeah, Hugo's mic issue is an example of what to expect. Can the help desk publish something like this for us? We can pass that along.
Can I ask my question now?
Oh, sure. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Yeah, and yeah, since John mentioned this has happened to me before in other Zoom meetings, that suddenly my mic, it's saying that it's unmuted, but still I cannot. And the only way I fixed it is going out of the meeting and coming back. I'm hoping that doesn't happen in my classes, but yeah. And also, if somebody has a better way to solve it and just leave the meeting and come back, that would be great. Well, but that was a comment aside. I went to my classroom today because I had the same issue, that what my classroom said in one document was different what I saw in the charts. So in this chart, so I went and I confirmed which is the, looking there, I saw the right number. So if somebody has doubts, you can go to your room and check. I also noticed that this may be the case that they haven't, the air conditioning or whatever is not working. This is in McClintock. The classroom was like a sauna. So the moment I got in, I had to open all the windows. And also, since they talk about ventilation, that I was thinking that maybe that's a possibility. If you can open the windows in your classroom, that's an option that you can open them up just to create more ventilation. The other thing that I did is I got a masking tape and a marker, and just in the back of the seat, I put numbers 1 through 12. So I think that's going to facilitate, I hope nobody takes them out. That's going to facilitate assigning seats. I think that's at this point, what I saw was that there is, they put a mic, although it's a very small class. I think that's going to help. There were some paper towels. There was no spray, so I don't know if that's going to be provided later, or you are supposed to be bringing your own. It still feels pretty tight in the classroom. It still feels pretty tight. So it gave me some pause when I saw the classroom, and I thought it was really tight. I'm assuming that they already measure everything, but it seemed tight. That's why I was more concerned about opening the windows. If that's a possibility for, to keep them on.
So you're bringing up the cleaning protocols has been seconded by Jill Leonard as something to talk about. Rob, can you talk about the cleaning protocols in the classrooms?
Yeah, in each classroom, as Hugo mentioned, there were towels but no spray bottles. There will be spray bottles. They will be refilled by the custodial staff on a regular schedule throughout the day. So the faculty member is asked to wipe down their teaching station. It would be nice if you do it when you leave, but I would recommend you do it when you come in. Students will have that same option to wipe down their learning area when they come in. We could encourage them to do that when they leave also, but students will be asked to do it when they come in, and then that will be up to them to do that. The custodians will be coming in, will clean the rooms. The time, they will be time stamped on the board of what time the room was cleaned, so you'll know that it was cleaned each morning. Communal areas will be cleaned 2 or 3 times a day, depending on the traffic flow. High touch areas will be done more often, and then all those high touch areas were cleaned, and then they had that antiviral, antimicrobial spray.
Microcare, yeah,
What's it called?
microcare.
Yeah, that was applied, and so those that will help with reducing the spread through touch. And again, we're going to ask our students, we're going to ask you to use hand sanitizer and wash regularly. If you've walked through any of the buildings, hand sanitizer availability has gone up exceedingly in the last week or so.
Let's see, we're running to the end of the time. We've got another question here from Rick Mengen, but Matt, if you want to go ahead and put the survey questions up. Oh, wait, we did have more. Sorry.
Yep. Well, and I had a couple different discussion slides, and I just flew by one of them. But there's one thing we touched on a little bit when we were talking about the flipped and the partial flipped was is collaborating. And so we just wanted to mention here at the end again that that collaborating in the class is yet another thing that's going to look a little bit different. And we have a picture here of one of the Jamridge classrooms, which just is an example. It's one of the first floor classrooms, but this is what they've done or are in the progress of doing to the Jamridge rooms. I haven't been over to the other buildings yet, but there's similar things going on there. And you can see the tables, which were originally purchased for Jamridge because of how flexible and movable they are supposed to be put in one specific spot. They have a mark on the ground, do not move the table from this spot. And they've put a plexiglass divider up between the two students who will be seated at each table. So that's gonna give a little bit of challenge for collaboration. You won't be able to use physical manipulatives. I know in some of the science classes in particular, they do some model stuff. Definitely in art classes, they do other physical things.
Unless it can be cleaned. So Rob, there are some places where there is shared equipment and shared manipulatives that can be cleaned. Is that right?
That is correct.
And we will ask when you submit your seating chart, we're going to ask you if there is shared equipment in the room, because if it's a classroom that shares equipment, your contact tracers will want to know that. Sorry, Matt.
That's okay. That's a good clarification. I was thinking more of the type of things where I've seen some modeling things that people build together in close quarters and stuff. And those, if they were used, they'd have to be used differently and individually, not collaboratively. Also, Jamridge in particular, but elsewhere on campus as well, there are tons of whiteboards, and we've been encouraging people, and many faculty for several years have been doing lots of group whiteboard activities. You have to have very limited, if any, use of those whiteboard activities because you can't have students going to the board together and writing together. No huddling up for group work anymore. And so some of this goes back to, we're not saying you can't collaborate. In fact, that would be awful, but you're going to have to collaborate differently. And so a lot of this comes back to the technology we talked about at the beginning, where there might be more reliance on technology for collaboration than you would necessarily normally have in a face-to-face class. So I talked a little bit about that Jamboard tool. It's a new interactive whiteboard tool from Google. So you can do like a Post-it note exercise on that with people, some in the room, some not in the room. They definitely don't have to be shoulder to shoulder, just as one example, or doing more things with VoiceThread. So just as you're planning your courses, the student-to-student interaction, of course, remains very important, but you're gonna have to think about how to address some of those challenges of collaboration in our new environment.
So Rob, maybe you could talk a little bit. I see Robert Belton wants to follow up a little bit about sharing of manipulatives or models and whether there are things that can be done with either gloves, what cleaning is required. Rob, could you talk about that a little bit?
And I don't have off the top of my head all the details, but we certainly have more access to PPE. And so if you were using models, for example, or shared equipment, then I would expect that you would ask students to wear gloves. We do have wipes that can be used to wipe down models. We have a recommendation from our technology group for how to clean sensitive equipment, electronics, and how, and we have purchased materials for that. I think that things like the models in the anatomy lab, we're going to have to think about the best way to clean those in between. We certainly are going to rely on students to do some of that cleaning in that case. So you'll have to ask them at the end of lab, prior to leaving, you need to wipe down the materials that you've used. It will not just be a spray bottle. We'll need to probably use the same kind of wipes that we've purchased that you would use on more sensitive electronic equipment and others. If you have questions, give me a call, or you can always feel free to call Brandon Sager. He's the one who's over the cleaning protocols for the university.
We have a couple questions here. So we are at this point over time, but I'm game to keep going a little bit longer. Rob, I don't know if you're able to stay a few extra minutes. Matt, Lisa?
Well, I can hang on for a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I can as well. And I launched the wrap-up poll in case there are people who need to leave but have a few seconds to take the poll before they bail out.
I'm happy to stay.
Great. So we'll keep going as long as we have questions and things to talk about. I noticed there are several questions here about outside the classrooms, the informal study areas, informal meeting gathering areas in Jamrich, the hallways, entrance, exit doors. Rob, do you want to talk any about those?
So we do have rooms with two doors. There's supposed to be one that's labeled as the entrance, one is the exit. If you walk through the buildings, we are asking students to stay to the right. We are asking them to stay 6 feet apart, even when waiting for class. Students have been asked not to show up for their class 15 minutes early and congregate in the hallways. They've been asked to not come to class more than 5 minutes beforehand. Some of the furniture in those common areas is being removed where possible, being reorganized so that people can sit further apart. I realize if you have a couch in an area and two people sit on it, they're not socially distant. So we're working on moving some of those things. You know, those are the challenges, and those are the things that we're going to have to rely on our students to use good behavior, and to keep their masks on. That's, keep in mind, we wear masks in situations where we can't be socially distant, and so we're going to be relying on the students to model some good behavior, and we're going to have to do the same thing ourselves.
We've been working on a lot of the issues with furniture and seating and masks in the library because, well, we have a lot of tables, we have a lot of chairs. We have been able to remove chairs from places where there's not social distance. We've rearranged our furniture. Like Rob said, couches are an issue. I've talked to Mike Bath about that. Couches are going to be an issue across campus. In the library, I'm actually reluctant to remove couches completely for two reasons. One is that I'm completely out of storage space, and so I end up taking group study rooms off, or I take the individual study rooms offline if I need more storage for things like couches, and I don't want to do that. The other thing about couches are we have some students who are not comfortable on a chair. Their students may be bigger than the chair and they just need a bigger space. And so I don't want to remove that option from them and force them to be uncomfortable or unable to use the library. And I mentioned the group study rooms. I would say that group these days for study rooms is not the same as it's been in the past. Most of our rooms upstairs are now 2-person capacity. They have enough room at the table that you can have 2 people one at either end of the table. We have 2 rooms that will have 3 people in them, that allows for 3 feet social distance. Room 311, which most of you have been in at some point with all the glass windows, only has 9 chairs in it now. Although I would recommend that if you get time, stop by and visit 311. It has beautiful new windows and a new ceiling. 311 is looking much better than it used to. But that's going to be a challenge for us. There will be limitations on the ability to eat unless you can either in a designated dining area or you can eat kind of under your mask. That's going to be an issue for students. Let's see, Rebecca provided some information. There was a question about bathroom use between classes, and Rebecca provided some information from the website. Thank you, Rebecca, for taking care of that. Do they have a place to go when they're not in class? Thinking about commuter students that can't go back to their homes or to their dorms. Crystal, yes, we're going to be recommending that students use the library for that. We don't have a final count right yet because we're expecting to get some more tables in here, but we have at least a couple hundred seats that are available with social distancing. So we have a lot of floor space in the library. We are putting tables and chairs where we can. We have some of the chairs that came out, or some of the tables, heaven forbid that anybody bring us more chairs, we do not need those, but we have some of the tables that came out of Jamrich to make room for classes to have social distance or in the lounge areas. So we'll get you a count on seats for the library, but we have that. And there was a question too about the 24/7 study area. We are working with Mike Bath that the library will be available as a 24/7 study area. I don't know exactly when that will start. We're hoping soon. Library services will be available during the library's open hours. Outside of the library's open hours, then it'll be security only.
So I think Sin Ling wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, by all means, go ahead.
Hello, thank you. I have a question about McClintock 106 because I'm actually using this classroom to teach my EC 101 sessions. And currently I have 41 students enrolled, and I actually stopped by the classroom and realized that it's large enough to accommodate probably 1 more chair at the back of the room. So in this circumstance, if the maximum is reduced from 42 to 40, probably as the seating chart just displayed, is it possible to just add 1 more chair so that I can continue to have face-to-face instruction?
Sin Ling, I'll have to call Jim Toms and ask him why it went down 1, and then I'll give you a call or send you an email.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So somebody did point out that on that diagram, it looks like it might have been copied over from a different room because there are 2 different room numbers on that chart. So
that really is 106. I know that it says 114 on the side. 114 is a much smaller room.
Okay.
And it's actually, those were the first rooms they did in CAD to try to figure out how they would do the new socially distant seating charts. And so those were the first drafts, and we'll make sure that they're not confusing, but that really is 106.
But the other thing to keep in mind is that instructors cannot decide on their own to just add a chair. That those seating capacities can only get changed by public safety or facilities. That we can't say, oh, there is enough room, I'm just going to pull somebody in. There's a question about expectations for office hours. Rob, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the master agreement as well as the NMUFA agreement lists that office hours, a certain number of office hours have to be face-to-face. We're waiving that requirement. All office hours can be virtual if a faculty member chooses. If they want to meet with students for office hours face-to-face. We have a number of conference rooms around campus that they can do those in and be socially distant. Those conference rooms all have a listed capacity. They're quite small, so it'd probably be a faculty member and 1 or 2 students at a time. But office hours can be all virtual if that's what a faculty member chooses.
Any best practice guidance for virtual office hours?
That I don't have. I'll leave that to the virtual people.
I could add one consideration that if you have open office hours and you're not having individual appointments, you might want to set up the wait room so that you can be talking to one student at a time and not have a breach of confidentiality with having another student that you don't happen to see join. So I would use the wait room feature when you set that Zoom session up.
And how do we sign up for the conference rooms for face-to-face office hours?
For the ones in arts and sciences, they can sign up the way they have in the past. They can call the College of Arts and Sciences and we will sign them up. And then there will also be some first come, first serve time also. So I realize that doesn't work as well as scheduling, but we will schedule as much as possible.
So Rob, if you're interested or your department heads are interested, the help desk and the Center for Teaching and Learning are using a reservation appointment scheduling that might help you with some of your scheduling for rooms. And Matt could help you offline and explain that to you and show you what that option looks like.
All right, that sounds good. Hey, so I'm gonna have to jump off. I have someone waiting for me. So thanks for everybody for getting on and all your questions. I know that I can speak for Leslie and Matt and Lisa. If you have questions that we didn't answer, reach out to any of us and we'll be happy to try to find you the answers. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. So I see that one of the questions, thank you for everybody who responded to the poll at the end. I see that there are still additional questions and needing more information about enforcing social distance mask requirements in the classroom. Obviously, that's a big one. We'll pass that along to Mike Bath and let him know that that's a hot issue. I will say, if you haven't already read the full mask guidance, and I think it might on one page, if you go into the mask policy, there's a longer PDF document that I think is actually labeled as something like mask accommodation. It's not necessarily, the file name or where it's linked is a little odd, but if you go to the bottom of it, there is some information about instructors and how to manage masks and people showing up without masks. So you might look at that, but we can pass this information along to Mike too. Matt or, oh, John says perhaps we can ask students to use Starfish for making office hour appointments, or would they not know how to do that? I'm not sure. It may depend on whether you have first year students or who's used it. That's actually not managed in any of our offices. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add about Starfish. Jill says they're supposed to know how to do it, but you can teach them quickly. And then we also have somebody saying Starfish is squirrely. I can't comment either way. Let's see. I think we've talked about all the questions. Matt, Lisa, anything you want to add, or anybody else have any questions? Anything that I missed?
Lisa, mute.
You're muted.
I'm going to add comment on Crystal's chat. Disability Services, in case any of you do not know, did put out a statement about masks and accommodations, and that faculty will be aware if you have any student in your class that has a mask accommodation, meaning that they'll probably be in a face shield, but they won't necessarily have to wear a mask. And it's a statement that they would like you to put in your syllabi, and it's encouraging other students not to confront them about not wearing a mask, so we don't end up with different type of confrontations going on between masked and unmasked students. So if you haven't seen that, I'm happy to send it to you if you email me.
One of the other things that I would point out, I think it's already been communicated in a bunch of other channels, but it's one that's always worth repeating. Instructors are expected to wear masks while they teach unless they have an accommodation, or if they work out something for the deaf students in the class as an accommodation as part of that. But you'll see that some of the classes have plexiglass shields in front of the instructor station. We were hoping that that would be adequate as a mask replacement in those rooms. The latest executive order on masks, though, does not exempt in those situations. So at least the last I've heard is that instructors are expected to wear masks while teaching. And like Lisa's saying in response to some of the questions, working with our deaf students, that's going to be a challenge. There are masks with clear panels, and when in doubt, contact disability services. I don't know whether a face shield would be allowed in those circumstances or not. You'd have to work closely with disability services to see what's appropriate. But just because you have a plexiglass shield in front of your room at your instructor station does not mean that you as the instructor can go maskless. Yeah, and so Rebecca says her understanding is that with a face shield, you still need to wear a mask. That's generally going to be true unless you have a medical accommodation. As employees, we would need to go through human resources to get that accommodation. Our students would need to go through disability services. Anything else? Thank you all for participating. If you do think of things afterwards, as we are all thinking of questions afterwards, please let us know. We will, if we don't know the answer, we'll try to connect you to the people who can help you find the answer.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.